James's heart pounded, not from the grueling workout, but from the weight of Ethan's gaze, a look that pinned him in place like a spotlight. He was sprawled on the gym mat, legs extended, sweat soaking his tank top, when Ethan's hand rested on his shoulder, a touch too warm, too steady, too long. In that fleeting second, James's world tilted, and the line between coach and something more blurred into a dangerous haze. The gym, Iron Pulse Fitness, sat in the heart of Seattle, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's gray skyline. James, 24, and chasing a dream of becoming a professional cyclist, had been training under Ethan Caldwell for 3 months. Ethan, 27, was a former track star turned personal trainer, his reputation built on discipline and charm. His sessions were brutal, his smile disarming, and James had always chalked up the butterflies in his stomach to exhaustion. But today, as Ethan knelt beside him, guiding his leg through a hamstring stretch, those butterflies felt more like a storm. "Focus, James," Ethan said, his voice low, almost a whisper, as his fingers pressed gently into James's calf. "You're tensing up again." His touch lingered, a slow glide up to James's thigh, and James's breath hitched. He should have pulled away, said something, anything, but he didn't. He couldn't. The gym faded, the clank of weights and hum of treadmills dissolving into white noise. All he could feel was Ethan's hand, steady and sure, and all he could see was the flicker of something unspoken in Ethan's brown eyes. James had grown up in a small town in Idaho, where being openly gay wasn't just frowned upon. It was a risk. He'd learned to hide, to deflect, to bury his feelings under layers of denial. Moving to Seattle was supposed to be his fresh start, a chance to chase his cycling dreams and maybe, just maybe, figure out who he was. But falling for his coach? That wasn't part of the plan. Ethan was straight, or so James had assumed. The lingering touches, the late-night texts about training plans that veered into personal questions, the way Ethan's laugh softened when it was just the two of them. Those were just in James's head, right? "All right, switch legs," Ethan said, breaking the moment. He stood, brushing his hands on his track pants, but his eyes didn't leave James. "You're doing great, man. Really." The praise felt like a lifeline, and James clung to it, even as doubt gnawed at him. Was he imagining the tension? Or was Ethan feeling it too? That night, James lay in his tiny Capitol Hill apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in his head. Ethan's hand on his thigh, the warmth of it, the way his own pulse had betrayed him. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through their texts. The last one, sent an hour ago, read, "You killed it today. Let's push harder tomorrow." Innocent enough, but James's mind spun. Was Ethan just being a good coach, or was there something more? The next morning, James arrived at the gym early, his nerves frayed. Ethan was already there, setting up equipment, his gray shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. "You're early," Ethan said, flashing a grin that made James's stomach flip. "Ready to suffer?" "Born ready," James shot back, trying to keep his voice steady. They fell into their routine, sprints, lunges, core work, but every correction Ethan made, every brush of his hand, felt electric. By the end of the session, James was breathless, not just from the workout. As they cooled down, Ethan suggested they grab coffee at the cafe next door. "Just to talk strategy," he added, but his tone held a question James couldn't ignore. The cafe, Brew and Grind, was a cozy spot with exposed brick walls and the scent of roasted beans. Over steaming lattes, Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes searching James's face. "You ever feel like you're running from something?" he asked, out of nowhere. "Not on the bike, I mean. In life." James froze, his cup halfway to his lips. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the time." He wanted to say more, to spill everything. His fears, his past, the way Ethan's presence made him feel alive and terrified all at once. But he didn't. Not yet. Ethan leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Me too," he said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm coaching to fix other people's lives or to avoid fixing my own." The confession hung between them, heavy and raw. James's heart raced. This wasn't just about training anymore. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he wasn't imagining it. Not anymore. James couldn't shake Ethan's words from his mind. They looped like a song on repeat, each syllable heavy with meaning he wasn't sure he could trust. Was Ethan opening a door, or was James just desperate to see one? Over the next week, their training sessions grew charged with an undercurrent neither acknowledged. Ethan's corrections became more deliberate, his hands guiding James's form with a tenderness that felt personal. A palm on his lower back during a plank, a fleeting grip on his wrist during a cool-down stretch. Each touch sent James's pulse into overdrive. He told himself it was nothing, that Ethan was just a hands-on coach. But the late-night texts grew longer, veering from training tips to questions about James's life, his dreams, his fears. "What's the one thing you'd do if you weren't afraid?" Ethan had asked one night. James hadn't answered, too scared to admit the truth. "I tell you how I feel." Seattle's autumn rain began to fall, turning the city into a mosaic of wet streets and glowing lights. James threw himself into training, hoping the burn in his muscles would drown out the ache in his chest. He was preparing for the Cascade Classic, a grueling cycling race that could put him on the map. Ethan believed in him, said he had the raw talent to go pro. But every time Ethan's hand lingered, every time their eyes met for a beat too long, James wondered if he was chasing the wrong kind of victory. One evening, after a particularly brutal session, Ethan suggested they stay late to work on James's sprint technique. The gym was nearly empty, the only sounds the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant patter of rain. Ethan stood behind James, adjusting his posture on a stationary bike. "Lean forward a bit," he murmured, his hands on James's shoulders, then sliding down to his waist. James's breath caught, his body frozen between wanting to lean into the touch and wanting to bolt. "You're too tense," Ethan said, his voice soft, his hands still resting on James's hips. "Relax. Trust me." The words felt like a command and a plea all at once. James turned his head slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze, and for a moment, the world stopped. Ethan's eyes were dark, intense, searching. James opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he nodded, his heart hammering. They didn't talk about it. Not that night, not the next day. But something had shifted, like a crack in a dam, and James felt the pressure building. He started noticing things he hadn't before. Ethan's lingering glances, the way he'd laugh a little too hard at James's dumb jokes, the way he'd find excuses to be close. It was exhilarating and terrifying, like riding down a hill with no brakes. One afternoon, as they stretched in a quiet corner of the gym, Ethan broke the silence. "You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to play by the rules?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes anything but. James's stomach twisted. "What kind of rules?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ethan shrugged, but his gaze didn't waver. "The ones that keep you from being who you are. The ones that make you hide." James's heart stopped. He wanted to ask what Ethan meant, to demand clarity, but fear clamped his mouth shut. He'd spent years hiding, building walls to keep himself safe. The idea of tearing them down, especially with Ethan, felt like stepping off a cliff. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I guess I'm still figuring out who that is." Ethan nodded, like he understood more than James was saying. "When you figure it out," he said, "let me know." That night, James couldn't sleep. He sat on his balcony, the city's lights blurred by rain, and thought about Ethan's words. He thought about his own life, the years spent pretending, the fear that had kept him silent. He wasn't just hiding from the world, he was hiding from himself. And Ethan, with his steady hands and searching eyes, was making it impossible to keep hiding. The next morning, James made a decision. He didn't know what Ethan wanted, or if he was reading the signals wrong, but he couldn't keep pretending nothing was happening. He'd go to the gym, push through another session, and then what? Tell Ethan he was falling for him? The thought made his stomach lurch, but the alternative, staying silent, staying safe, was starting to feel like a cage. James walked into Iron Pulse Fitness with a plan, but his resolve wavered the moment he saw Ethan. The coach was laughing with another client, his head thrown back, his smile bright enough to light up the dim gym. James's courage faltered, but he pushed forward, gripping his water bottle like a lifeline. Their session was intense, Ethan pushing James harder than ever. "You're holding back," Ethan said during a set of burpees, his voice sharp. "Give me everything, James. No excuses." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they felt like a challenge to more than just his workout. James pushed through, sweat dripping, muscles screaming, until they collapsed onto the mats for a cool down. Ethan knelt beside him, guiding his leg into a stretch. His hands were steady, professional, but James felt the familiar spark. "You're killing it," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "But you're still holding back. Not just here." He tapped James's chest, right over his heart, and James's breath caught. "What's that supposed to mean?" James asked, his voice rough, daring Ethan to say it. Ethan hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice low. "You know what I mean. You're scared, and I get it. But you don't have to be. Not with me." The words hit like a punch. James stared at Ethan, searching his face for a lie, for a joke, for anything that would let him dismiss this as a misunderstanding. But Ethan's eyes were steady, unguarded, and James felt the walls he'd built start to crumble. "I don't know what you want from me," James said finally, his voice shaking. "You're my coach. This isn't supposed to happen." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I know," he said, "but it's happening anyway." The gym was quiet, the other clients gone, the rain outside a steady drumbeat. James wanted to run, to hide, but Ethan's hand was still on his leg, grounding him. I'm not out," James admitted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "Back home, I couldn't be. And now, I don't know how to be." Ethan's expression softened. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "But you don't have to do it alone." They didn't kiss, didn't cross that line, but the air between them crackled with possibility. When James left the gym that night, his head was spinning. He walked through Seattle's wet streets, the city's lights reflecting off puddles, and felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he wasn't just running from his past, he was running toward something. The next few weeks were a blur of training and tentative steps toward honesty. Ethan didn't push, but he didn't pull away either. They talked more, not just about cycling, but about life. Ethan's strained relationship with his conservative family, James's fear of disappointing his own. They shared stories of their pasts, their dreams, and slowly, carefully, they began to share pieces of themselves. One evening, after a late session, Ethan invited James to his apartment for dinner. "Just to hang out," he said, but his eyes said more. James hesitated, then agreed, his heart pounding. Ethan's place was a small loft in Belltown, all exposed brick and warm lights, with a view of the Puget Sound. They cooked pasta together, laughing over spilled sauce, and for a moment, James felt like he could breathe. As they sat on the couch, plates balanced on their knees, Ethan turned to him. "I like you, James," he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. "Not just as a client, not just as a friend. I need you to know that." James's heart stopped. He dreamed of this moment, feared it, wanted it. "I like you too," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "But I'm scared. I don't know how to do this." Ethan reached for his hand, his touch warm and sure. "We'll figure it out," he said. Together. James's world felt like it was splitting open, raw and new. As he sat on Ethan's couch, their hands still clasped. The admission hung between them, a fragile truth that could either bind them or break them. For the first time in years, James didn't feel like he had to hide, but the fear lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. The Cascade Classic was 2 weeks away, and training intensified. Ethan pushed James harder, but the dynamic had shifted. Their sessions were still professional, but every glance, every touch, carried weight. James felt alive, electric, but also exposed. What if this was a mistake? What if Ethan changed his mind? What if the world found out? One afternoon, as they stretched in the gym, a new client, Marcus, approached Ethan. Marcus was a former teammate of Ethan's, all charm and sharp edges, and James felt a pang of jealousy as they laughed over old stories. Marcus's eyes lingered on Ethan, and James's stomach twisted. He tried to focus on his stretches, but doubt crept in. Was Ethan like this with everyone? Was James just another client who'd misread the signals? That night, James texted Ethan, his fingers trembling. "Are we okay?" He wrote, hating how needy it sounded. Ethan's reply came quickly. "More than okay. Meet me at the pier tomorrow?" The next evening, they walked along the Seattle waterfront, the Ferris wheel glowing against the night sky. The air was crisp, the scent of salt and fried food mingling with the hum of the city. Ethan stopped by the railing, his hands in his pockets. "I saw the way you looked at Marcus today," he said, his tone gentle. "You don't have to worry, James. I'm not going anywhere." James blushed, embarrassed but relieved. I've never done this before, he admitted. I don't know how to trust it. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. I'm not perfect, and I don't have all the answers. But I'm here. I want this. I want you. They kissed then, under the glow of the Ferris wheel, a soft, tentative press of lips that felt like a promise. James's heart raced, but for once, it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. The days leading up to the race were a whirlwind. James trained harder than ever, fueled by Ethan's belief in him and the new fire in his chest. But the closer they got, the more reality intruded. Ethan was still his coach, and their relationship, if exposed, could cost Ethan his job. James overheard whispers in the gym, clients gossiping about Ethan's favorites, their tone laced with suspicion. He brushed it off, but the fear lingered. The night before the race, James couldn't sleep. He called Ethan, his voice shaky. What if this ruins everything, he asked. What if we're making a mistake? Ethan's voice was steady, grounding. We're not a mistake, he said. But we'll be careful. We'll figure it out. Just focus on the race tomorrow. I've got your back. James clung to those words as he drifted off, but doubt still gnawed at him. He wanted to believe in Ethan, in them, but the world wasn't as kind as Ethan's promises. The morning of the Cascade Classic dawned clear and cold, the mountains looming in the distance like silent judges. James stood at the starting line, his bike gleaming, his heart a tangled mess of nerves and determination. Ethan was there, clipboard in hand, his coach facade firmly in place, but his quick nod to James said everything words couldn't. The race was brutal, 160 miles of winding roads, steep climbs, and relentless competition. James pushed through, his legs burning, his mind focused on Ethan's voice in his head. You've got this. You're stronger than you know. He crossed the finish line in 5th place. Not a win, but a damn good showing for a rookie. The crowd cheered, and James's chest swelled with pride, but his eyes searched for Ethan. He found him near the team tent, his face lit with a grin. You were incredible, Ethan said, pulling James into a quick, professional hug that lingered just a second too long. James wanted to say more, to pull Ethan close and forget the world, but the crowd was too close, the eyes too many. That night, at the team's celebration dinner, the tension broke. They were at a crowded bar in downtown Seattle, teammates and coaches mingling, drinks flowing. James and Ethan stole a moment in a quiet corner, their knees brushing under the table. I'm proud of you, Ethan said, his voice low, his hand finding James's under the table. Not just for today. James's heart soared, but before he could respond, Marcus appeared, his smile too sharp, his eyes too knowing. You two are cozy, he said, his tone teasing but edged with something darker. Careful, Ethan. People talk. Ethan's grip on James's hand tightened, but his face stayed calm. Let them, he said, but James felt the weight of those words. Marcus walked away, but the damage was done. The whispers were growing, and James felt the walls closing in. The next day, back at the gym, the air was different. A few clients avoided James's gaze, and the gym manager, a stern woman named Carla, called Ethan into her office. James waited, his stomach in knots, until Ethan emerged, his face pale. She heard rumors, Ethan said quietly. Nothing concrete, but she's watching us. James's heart sank. What do we do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. We keep going, Ethan said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. We're not doing anything wrong, but we need to be careful. Careful. The word felt like a chain. James wanted to scream, to tell the world he didn't care who knew, but the fear was too real. He'd seen what happened to people like him in his hometown, shunned, mocked, worse. And Ethan had his career, his reputation. Could they survive the scrutiny? That night, James went to Ethan's apartment, needing answers. They sat on the couch, the space between them heavy. I don't want to hide, James said, his voice breaking. But I don't want to ruin your life. Ethan's eyes were fierce. You're not ruining anything, he said. But this isn't just about us. It's about the world we're in. We have to be smart. James nodded, but the weight of it all pressed down on him. He wanted to believe they could make it work, but doubt was a relentless enemy. The weeks after the race were a tightrope walk. James and Ethan kept their distance in the gym, their interactions clipped and professional, but behind closed doors, they were unstoppable. Stolen kisses in Ethan's apartment, quiet nights sharing dreams and fears. It was a secret world they built together, fragile but beautiful. But the whispers grew louder, and James felt the pressure mounting. One morning, Carla called them both into her office. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice cold. "People are talking, and it's bad for business. Ethan, you're a great coach, but I can't have this kind of drama." Ethan's jaw clenched. "There's no drama," he said. "James is my client. That's it." Carla's eyes narrowed. "I'm not stupid. End it, or you're out." James felt like he'd been punched. He wanted to fight, to tell Carla she was wrong, but Ethan's hand on his arm stopped him. They left the office in silence, the weight of her words crushing them. That night, at Ethan's apartment, James broke. "I can't do this," he said, tears stinging his eyes. "I can't keep hiding. I can't keep pretending you're just my coach." Ethan pulled him close, his arms a safe haven. "Then we won't," he said. "But we need a plan. I'll find another job. We'll figure it out. I'm not losing you." The next day, Ethan quit. He told Carla he was moving on to new opportunities, but James knew the truth. It was a sacrifice, one that broke James's heart and filled it at the same time. They decided to leave Seattle, to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere they could be themselves without fear. They moved to Portland, a city vibrant with acceptance, and Ethan found work at a small cycling studio. James kept training, his sights set on bigger races, but more importantly, he and Ethan built a life together. They rented a tiny house with a view of the Willamette River, cooked terrible meals, laughed until they couldn't breathe. For the first time, James felt free, not just to love Ethan, but to love himself. Years later, standing on a podium after winning his first professional race, James looked out at the crowd and saw Ethan, his smile brighter than the sun. The journey hadn't been easy. The whispers, the sacrifices, the fear, but it was worth it. They'd fought for their love, for their truth, and they'd won. In that moment, James knew the hands that had lingered on his thigh all those months ago hadn't just stretched his muscles. They'd stretched his heart, his courage, his life. And he'd never stop running toward the man who'd helped him find himself.